If you go to the Steam page for the game called Owinka Shooter, you're gonna find a free-to-play game that has unfinished textures on the walls, the enemies are just beans with angry faces painted on them, and the combat animations in the game are just practically non-existent. Overall, it took me about 40 minutes to go through all the levels in the story, and for a game that anybody would look at and just immediately write off as bottom tier, Owinka Shooter somehow has more personality and flavor in it than any big-budget game that I've played in the past year. And the same thing happens with Muck, one of my favorite games of all time, where you have an open-world survival game from a YouTuber who whipped it up in just a few months as a challenge. But what these two games have in common, alongside a bunch of other bad games that you find on Steam, is that there's a certain level of charm when it comes to playing them that you just can't get with any big budget project that comes out today. And I'm not trying to make another video to bash AAA titles, because I'm pretty sure I do that plenty enough on the regular. But I think that at some point we got a little too used to playing games that just love to overpromise with what they're coming out with, you know, by using like amazing marketing and animations, just for it to end up being an absolute flop. Like for example, let's talk about Skull and Bones for a moment. This is a game by Ubisoft that tried really hard to convince the public that it was worth the $70 price tag that it released with, only because it was on a $200 million budget. And it even had a huge marketing campaign calling it the world's first quadruple A title, only for it to end up having a 28% approval rate. And once people actually got their hands on it, they realized that the gameplay was actually so stale, it was being outclassed by Assassin's Creed Black Flag that came out 11 years ago. This is the perfect example of a game that had everything going for it, with all the signals pointing to the fact that it was going to be a banger of a video game, but in reality it ended up being nothing more than a commercial failure. Now what we're going to talk about today is the complete opposite side of the spectrum, where you have these sort of games that, based off first impressions, you would think that they're going to suck. You know, there's absolutely no indication that they're actually going to be fun, because they're usually made by someone who's either still learning how to code video games, or it was just like a quick project for them, but when you actually get the chance to sit down and play them, they just end up blowing your expectations out of the water. Let's go back to Owinka Shooter for a moment. So in this game, you play as a clone of Owinka, and you were created for the sole purpose of watching videos published by the Owinka Television Institute. So basically, they're just using you to viewbot their videos. There's a little robot helper named Jerry who gives you a gun, and you have to fight your way through the facility to escape and earn your freedom. Jerry's pretty cool, actually. So one of the reasons why these so-called bad games sometimes end up outperforming the bigger titles is because you can really feel that level of authenticity coming from the developer. It's like they're not afraid to get a little silly with their content, you know? And it's not so much about how well the story is written or how polished the gameplay is, it's really all about having that extra layer of personality that's injected into the game, because they're not too worried about having that level of professionalism that you're usually gonna find in a big budget project like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, for example. That can sometimes lead to making the whole experience feel almost like manufactured. So smaller developers are not really afraid to get extra creative with how they implement some parts of the game to compensate for the lack of budget that they need to hyper-polish the experience, and believe it or not, that imperfection, that feeling of genuinity, is the same type of feeling you get when you're watching a YouTuber who's really down to earth and you feel like you can really connect with. And I know that's something I'm definitely working on right now, because I struggle, man. Sometimes I will upload a video and I will post it and I'll just sit down and rewatch it to check something, and all I can do is really just sit there and go like, why do I feel like I'm filming a commercial? It's like I'm talking to the television or something, you know? But the best comparison I can give you is that one, that sometimes we prefer a smaller budget experience because we feel like we can relate to it better. Now, that's not to say that all small budget projects are considered hidden gems and bangers, because unfortunately, with game development being the easiest it's ever been to get into, and anybody can learn coding to make a great game, you also end up with a bunch of asset flip and shovelware games that are just there to make a quick buck, and they're just flooding the Steam pages. Like for example, there's a game called Epstein that, by every definition of the word, is a pretty bad game. It's a generic island survival game with a bunch of assets mashed together that's just piggybacking off of a popular name, and once you pay the $4 it's worth and spend just 5 minutes playing the game, you realize that you probably got robbed in broad daylight. Now imagine someone decided to use that very same strategy of minimum effort, maximum monetization, but they also managed to have a multi-million-dollar game development studio backing them. That's how you end up with a lot of these big budget games that take your favorite IPs and just give them the same type of corporate cookie cutter feeling that makes you think that maybe, you know, just maybe, their main focus is really all about making money and not so much about making a great game. And look, I'm not really an expert when it comes to game development or marketing or anything like that, but if you make a good game and you do some decent marketing, it's gonna sell. I'm pretty sure it'll sell. But if you do amazing marketing for a crappy game, I mean, it'll probably sell, yeah, but you're gonna ruin your reputation for all your future projects. So yeah, where's the real win there, man? Now, another thing I personally love about these underrated bad games that you're rarely ever going to see with a massive studio, with some exceptions here and there of course, is that you can usually find a developer that has a really good relationship with their community and is actively listening to feedback from people. Like, you see them being a lot more involved with their players on their Discord chats, they're more receptive to things like new features and bug reports, and a lot of the times, if the developer is also a content creator, then you get that sense of collaboration between the creator and the player. Because now it's not just about you buying a game, now you're actively being taken alongside the development journey with videos and devlogs, and it makes you feel a lot more included in this whole secret behind the scenes look. Like, for example, there's a YouTuber out there called Trip Rainy, who's a solo developer that's been making all types of games lately, like rage games, fighting games, and right now he's working on a roguelike as well. He only just started learning how to code very recently too, and the fact that you as a viewer can see every single step of the development process and how he's implementing things he learns along the way lets you connect better with the finished product, and you sort of feel like you're a part of it too, like you were just there when it happened. Now, meanwhile, if we're talking about big budget studios, which we're definitely not bashing today, a lot of the times it can feel like you're just talking to a brick wall. A good example of this is the game called Anthem, which you probably already forgot about at this point, but Anthem was an online multiplayer RPG that on release was launched with a huge number of issues that the community was actually very vocal about, and it felt like a lot of the concerns that people were voicing were just being lost to the void. There was little to no communication from the developers, and eventually that caused Anthem to just be forgotten about and abandoned. And while this type of open communication between player and creator is usually seen as a good thing, well, there's always a bad side to everything. Because unfortunately, some people just end up taking it way too far. If we look at Danny's case, for example, the man who created Muck, he practically just got chased off the internet by his fanbase. He got so popular with the games he was putting out to the point where his viewers got super parasocial with the development process, and it almost turned rabid, with some fans going as far as sending him threats for not releasing games sooner, and as a result of all that pressure that Danny was put under, he just went completely dark and hasn't uploaded for years. But in a scenario where your fanbase just doesn't turn completely toxic, we can talk about the one thing that smaller underrated projects usually have as a trump card against a bigger budget title, and it's the main reason why we're seeing such an explosion of small and mid-level studios blow up in popularity lately. The one thing smaller developers seem to understand that a lot of AAA studios just magically forgot about overnight is that at the end of the day, gameplay is king. There's no easy way out. If your game isn't fun, it's most likely not gonna go anywhere. Let's go back to Muck for a second, because there's a reason why this is one of my favorite games of all time. It's an open world survival game where you explore and gather resources, you craft tools and weapons you can upgrade, and you fight off the monsters that spawn at night. Your goal is to repair the broken ship and escape the island of Muck, and every now and then you'll get a boss fight that you're hopelessly unprepared for, but you know, that's just part of the fun. What I like so much about the game is that it doesn't try to take itself too seriously. It might be a blocky looking game, and sometimes things just don't load properly and they end up looking all funny, but like I mentioned, that's just part of the charm. And the open world survival mechanics of it are so addicting that I really just can't tell you how many times I found myself just playing it over and over again, trying to find different ways to beat the game, and just bringing some friends along to mess with them too, you know? And just like how people don't care about photorealistic graphics if your game is boring, they also don't mind overlooking crappy graphics if the gameplay is good enough. So for a small developer that doesn't have access to a huge budget to make their game look like a AAA game, one of their advantages is that they know they can't compete in terms of aesthetics, so they gotta go all in on immersion and satisfying gameplay, and being a game with personality that ends up leaving a mark on the player. And that's why a lot of the times when you find one of these hidden gems, it just feels so rewarding to experience them. Because in a way, they feel the same way games used to feel 15, maybe 20 years ago, where the graphics were good for the time, but it felt like every big studio back then still relatively understood that gameplay was still king. I mean, lately, the most fun I've been having gaming recently, if I'm not playing through random Steam games, it's just going back through the old library on the GameCube, you know? And honestly, that's all the proof you're ever gonna need that a bigger budget, better graphics, great marketing, none of that can save a bad game. And it's gotten to the point where we've all been burned so many times by games that love to overpromise and just end up under-delivering that now everybody's super skeptical whenever a trailer comes out that's looking a little too good. Especially if they don't show any gameplay on it. A trailer means absolutely nothing if there's no gameplay. But I gotta tell you that for as sucky as it feels to pay full price for a game that we end up hating, the opposite feels just as good, man. When you find an underrated bad game that just under-promises in every aspect of the word, but once you actually get the chance to sit down and play it and it just ends up over-delivering on everything, man, that is just the best feeling in the world for a gamer. That's when I actually go out of my way to start telling people and recommending games. And if you go out there and make a cool experience that's authentic to your vision as a game developer, that's engaging and has solid gameplay, well, there's still no guarantee it'll pop off, unfortunately. But, you know, with the gaming industry leading more towards burnout from badly designed big budget titles, and with the new wave of indies just blowing up left and right, There's more opportunity now to be seen than ever before, especially if you take advantage of social media to use your marketing. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about with you guys today, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.